Today, we descend into the Bay Area of 1969, a world of anti-war marches, acid-drenched nights, and city streets humming with unrest. But amid the music and protests came a quieter sound. Envelopes sliding into newsrooms, their papers soaked in menace. Inside, blocky letters screamed with child's rage and a soldier's precision, symbol circles, and threats braided into ciphers that promised blood. He called himself Zodiac. No name, no face, just a sign scratched like a scar across the public mind. Within weeks, couples were dead, a cabbie lay slumped over his wheel, and the police were chasing shadows. He wrote faster than they could respond, his voice multiplying through headlines, until every breakfast table was a crime scene. And half a century later, his words still crawl under the skin, because the killings may have ended, but the letters never stopped speaking. Imagine this. A letter arrives at the San Francisco Chronicle in the summer of 1969. The envelope is ordinary enough, stamped, sealed, addressed. But inside, chaos. A page of blocky handwriting, manic capital letters, threats dripping from every uneven line. This is a Zodiac speaking. It declares, as if the name itself were a weapon, and attached, a cryptogram, 408 symbols scrawled in a grid like a puzzle designed by a lunatic mathematician with a grudge against humanity. The writer promises death. He promises more bodies unless the code is published on the front page of every major newspaper. And because this isn't enough to freeze your blood, he signs it with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, like some primitive god marking territory. Police are baffled. The public is horrified. And somewhere in Northern California, a man is laughing. He knows he has them in his grip, dangling on his words, forced to obey his bizarre demands or risk fresh killings. This is not just murder. This is theater. This is power in ink. And what makes it worse? The code. Those 408 symbols. They aren't just gibberish. When amateur code breakers finally untangle the message, it doesn't give his name, his motive, or his face. It gives something worse. A glimpse into the abyss. He describes himself as a killer who collects slaves for the afterlife. He declares murder to be the ultimate game. He assures the world he will never be caught. Think about that. The first real words the Zodiac ever gave us, his grand introduction to the world, weren't a confession. They weren't even a negotiation. They were a sermon of cruelty. A man advertising his own darkness, carving his legend into newspapers so that children, teachers, priests, and politicians all had to read the same message. I am out here, and I am hunting. The letters are not just notes. They're crimes in themselves. Psychological bullets fired into the minds of a generation already stumbling through the violence of the late 60s. Every time one landed, the city froze, waiting to see what came next. Would it be another cipher, another body, or both? This wasn't some unhinged, rambling scribbler. The Zodiac was deliberate, precise. He understood how fear multiplies when it's written, when it spreads from one mailbox to a million breakfast tables. He wasn't just killing people, he was hijacking reality. And the worst part? We still don't know who he was. Northern California, late 1960s. It's not the flower power utopia people like to picture. Sure, the Summer of Love had painted San Francisco in psychedelic swirls. The Grateful Dead were strumming guitars in Golden Gate Park, and kids were chanting peace slogans with flowers in their hair. But underneath the tie-dye, the city was fraying. The Vietnam War hung over every household like an acid rain cloud. Draft notices slipped into mailboxes, ripping sun from families. Protest marches clogged the streets. Trust in government was crumbling. Add in the Manson family murders in Los Angeles, just a month away, and California was already a stage set for nightmares. Then there's the geography. San Francisco and its surrounding counties, Vallejo, Napa, Solano, weren't yet swallowed by the sprawl we know today. They were patchworks of highways cutting through sleepy suburbs, remote lovers' lanes, and shadow-soaked woods. Places where the stars outshone the streetlights. Places perfect for secrets. Perfect for ambush. The Bay Area itself was a paradox. You had booming tech prototypes at Stanford, freewheeling counterculture in Haight-Ashbury, and, quietly, some of the most advanced law enforcement divisions in the country. But even with radios crackling, helicopters ready and squads on standby, all of that preparation means nothing when the threat is invisible, anonymous, impossible to pin down. The newspapers were lifelines and the morning ritual binding city to city. Imagine sipping weak diner coffee, unwrapping your chronicle, and seeing not world news, not sports scores, but a killer writing directly to you, to your neighbors, to your kids. No tweet storms, no viral posts. Just ink on paper, but with the weight of guillotine. And let's not forget the psychology of the era. Serial killing wasn't even a household concept yet. The term itself was still years from being popularized. Most people thought of killers as either crime of passion drunks or mob hitmen. The idea of someone murdering strangers for pleasure, then taunting the world about it, was alien, almost unthinkable. That's the backdrop. A world of war, distrust, and cultural fractures. A society already suspicious, already primed for paranoia. And then the Zodiac steps onto the stage, almost gleefully aware that fear is the most valuable currency of the time. He doesn't just murder people. He injects himself into the bloodstream of an already wounded America. The Bay Area thought it was ready for anything. Riots, assassinations, social collapse. What it wasn't ready for was a phantom who writes in codes, kills in shadows, and thrives on attention. He wasn't just killing in Northern California. He was reshaping the mythology of the entire decade. You can't talk about the Zodiac Killer like he's just another criminal. He's less a man and more a distortion, a smudge on history. We don't have a name, we don't have a face, and yet we know his handwriting as if it were an old acquaintance. Thick black letters, pressed hard into paper, each one screaming for recognition. He wanted permanence. His mark left not on stone tablets, but on newspaper columns. Who was he? That's the poisonous question. A dock worker from Vallejo? A jilted teacher with a god complex? A bored ex-military man who never shook off the war? Every theory fits for a moment, then falls apart. Because the truth is, the Zodiac is a phantom stitched together from possibility. What we do know is his chosen persona. This is a Zodiac speaking. Like a radio broadcast from hell, he branded himself. Murderers usually hide. He advertised. And that's not just ego, it's strategy. He wanted to be more than a killer. He wanted to be a myth. A force so big that 50 years later, we're still talking about him like he's sitting in the room, waiting to chuckle at the guesses. And it worked. The Zodiac outgrew his crimes. He became a cipher himself, a puzzle no one has solved. Even his victims, tragically, their names often fade beneath his shadow. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, young lovers executed on a December night. Darlene Ferrin, a vibrant woman gunned down in her car. Paul Stein, a cab driver shot in cold blood while working his shift. Their lives were stolen, but in the headlines, the killer devoured all the oxygen. That's the cruelty of the Zodiac. He not only murdered, he erased. But if we peel away the theatrics, what remains? A lonely man, maybe someone desperate enough for significance that he'd carve it in blood and ink. Think about it. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted acknowledgement, proof of his existence. The ciphers weren't merely games. They were declarations. Look at me, fear me, solve me. Psychologists would later say he embodied the dark hunger for control. The thrill wasn't the kill, It was the panic afterward. He fed off it, the way some people binge candy when stressed. Fear was his sugar rush. And still, we circle back to the same blank wall. We don't know who he was. Not then. Not now. He remains a silhouette, a smirk hidden behind paper, daring us to fill in the missing face. Maybe he was ordinary. Maybe we pass him on the street 100 times without knowing. And isn't that the most terrifying thing? That the Zodiac could have been anyone. December 20th, 1968. It's supposed to be nothing more sinister than two teenagers on a date. David Faraday, 17, straight-laced, polite. Betty Lou Jensen, 16, outgoing, curious, the kind of girl who wanted to see the world before it saw her. They drove out to Lake Herman Road, one of those rural stretches of asphalt where headlights vanish into pitch black, where the world feels paused, emptied, private. They never made it home. The scene police stumbled onto looked like something torn out of a nightmare. David was slumped beside the car, a bullet wound in his head. Betty Lou lay a short distance away, sprawled in the cold night grass. 5 shots in her back. No robbery, no sexual assault, no witnesses. Just 2 young lives extinguished with mechanical precision. Vallejo was stunned. It wasn't that murders didn't happen. It was that murders didn't happen like this. Random, brutal, unprovoked, and yet there was a certain performance to it. Betty Lou's body found yards from the vehicle, as though she'd run for her life and been cut down mid-flight. David shot at point-blank range, almost execution style. Whoever did this wasn't clumsy. He was deliberate. At first, investigators didn't see it as the opening act of a nightmare saga. There was no Zodiac yet, just whispers of possible drive-by. Maybe a jealous ex-boyfriend, maybe some teenage rivalry gone too far. But the air was already changing, heavy with dread that this wasn't random at all. That was a blueprint. And indeed it was. Because 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, another lover's lane turned into a hunting ground. Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau parked in Blue Rock Springs, a quiet spot where couples went for privacy. A man approached their car with a flashlight. Police maybe? Safe maybe? Then the gunfire erupted. Darlene was shot to death. Michael survived, though barely, his body riddled with bullets. And this time, there was no mistaking it. The killer picked up the phone and called the police himself. Calm, cold, almost polite. He confessed to the shooting and, for good measure, claimed responsibility for the murders at Lake Herman Road. He didn't give a name. Not yet, but the message was clear. This wasn't chance. This was a pattern. The first disturbance wasn't just the blood on the asphalt. It was a realization that the Bay Area wasn't dealing with a crime of passion. It was dealing with a predator who hunted in pairs, who stalked the edges of romance, and who, most horrifying of all, wanted recognition. What began as a single tragic crime scene was, in truth, the prologue to a performance of terror that would stretch across years. By the time the first letter hit the Chronicle in August 1969, the murders were already terrible enough. But what the world hadn't expected was the encore. The killer stepping out from the shadows not with a weapon, but with stationery. It was as if Jack the Ripper had gotten bored of foggy alleys and decided to audition for a newspaper column. 3 nearly identical letters went out. To the Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each was a declaration of authorship for the 2 attacks. Each was soaked in arrogance. And stapled to each, a cipher, 136 characters apiece, that the writer swore would reveal his identity. A puzzle box murderer, dangling riddles like bait. What do you do with something like that? The police hesitated. If they published, they'd be giving him exactly what he wanted. The spotlight. If they refused, he promised more killing. A hostage situation. But instead of bodies tied to chairs, it was the entire city under the gun. They published. They had to. When the cipher was cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife, not by the FBI, not by military cryptographers, the reveal was a slap in the face. It didn't give a name. It didn't give a motive that made sense. It was rambling, grotesque philosophy, murder as entertainment, murder as immortality. I like killing people because it is so much fun, he wrote. Imagine reading that over breakfast cereal. And this is where the case began mutating. This wasn't about bodies anymore. This was about power. Every letter pulled thousands of readers into the killer's orbit, forced them to imagine him not just as a man, but as a presence, an ongoing voice they couldn't silence. The contradictions piled up like trash. He was a nobody who wanted to be a somebody. He was a coward hiding behind paper. Yet he had the gall to taunt police directly. He wrote with precision about ciphers, yet misspelled words so badly it looked almost intentional. Was he a genius? A fraud? A drunk with a library card? The uncertainty was part of the design. And the sightings. Oh, the sightings. After the murder of cab driver Paul Stein in October 1969, witnesses described a heavy-set man walking calmly away from the scene, wiping down the car. Police were right there, even stopped the man briefly, but let him go. Too ordinary, they thought. Too forgettable. And doesn't that sting? The Zodiac may have brushed shoulders with the very men hunting him. The mystery was no longer just what he did. It was how he kept slipping through the cracks. Each crime scene left crumbs. Each letter sharpened the profile. And yet every time investigators tried to piece it together, the image dissolved back into smoke. Something was wrong. Something was missing. And that's the terrifying part. Everyone knew it. If you want to watch law enforcement unravel in real time, the Zodiac case is practically a documentary. Vallejo Police, Napa County Sheriffs, San Francisco detectives, the FBI, the Chronicle's editors, even armchair cryptographers, they all scrambled, often in different directions, stepping on each other's toes. It was a circus where the clown in the middle was a murderer laughing from the cheap seats. Investigators tried to build a profile. Ex-military, maybe, because of his talk of man-killing devices and boot prints at crime scenes that matched military-issued footwear. Educated, maybe because he knew ciphers. Or not educated at all, because he spelled Christmas as Christmas and paradise as paradis. Was that deliberate camouflage or genuine sloppiness? Every theory produced its own trap. Then came the suspects. Arthur Lee Allen, the schoolteacher with a penchant for disturbing behavior, who wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch. Yes, really, and reportedly bragged about fantasies of killing couples. He failed polygraphs, smelled of red flags, and yet no forensic evidence ever tied him directly to the crimes. Years later, DNA testing on Zodiac letters didn't match him. The case against him collapsed into ambiguity. Other names surfaced like bubbles in a toxic swamp. Richard Gaikowski, a radical journalist whose writing eerily echoed Zodiac's tone. Lawrence Kane, with brain injuries and a criminal history, conveniently living near multiple victims. Even Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, got floated as a possible candidate. Each suspect fit some puzzle pieces, but left others scattered on the floor. And the letters kept coming, some with blood-stained scraps of clothing, to prove authenticity, some with new ciphers, more complex than the last, some threatening school buses full of children, as if the killer wanted to hold the entire education system hostage. Police guarded bus routes with shotguns. Parents didn't let their kids walk alone. One anonymous man's words were warping the rhythms of daily life. Theories multiplied in the press. Was Zodiac a single man or a group? A frustrated cryptographer? A failed novelist using the city as his manuscript? The FBI toyed with the idea that he might be connected to other unsolved crimes, scattered across California like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. What's maddening is how many clues seemed so close to clarity, but slid back into mud. Fingerprints lifted from Stein's cab, smudged, inconclusive. Handwriting comparison suggestive but never definitive. DNA swabs decades later. Contaminated, partial, ambiguous. It's as if the case itself is allergic to resolution, repelling certainty like oil against water. Theories keep people sane in this kind of chaos. They let you pretend you're a step ahead of the monster. But with Zodiac, every promising lead curdled into another layer of mystery. And each time the investigation blinked, he wrote another letter to remind everyone who was really in charge. October 11th, 1969. The night the Zodiac broke his own pattern. No lover's lane. No moonlit countryside. Just a yellow cab in San Francisco's Presidio Heights. Parked at the curb like any ordinary end-of-shift drop-off. Paul Stein, 29 years old, driving to make a living, picked up a passenger who asked for a ride to Cherry Street. Routine. Forgettable. Until it wasn't. At point-blank range, the passenger shot Stein in the head. But instead of fleeing into darkness, the killer lingered. He cut away a piece of Stein's bloody shirt, wiped down surfaces with chilling composure, and walked away into the night as if leaving a cafe, not a corpse. Witnesses watched from a window. Children. They saw him, heavy-set, glasses calm. They even called the police immediately. And here comes the gut punch. Officers rushed to the scene, spotted a man matching the description just blocks away. They stopped him, talked to him, let him go. Why? Because the dispatcher had relayed the wrong detail. They were told to look for a black suspect. The Zodiac was white. The man they let walk away? Likely the killer himself, strolling through the search perimeter with blood still drying on his clothes. That single miscommunication might be the most infamous blunder in modern criminal history. Imagine being the cop who shook hands with a ghost and waved him off into eternity. Then, as if mocking the entire system, the Zodiac mailed another letter to the Chronicle, this one with a fragment of Stein's shirt enclosed. Proof. Physical, undeniable proof. His handwriting was smug as ever, boasting about how easily he slipped through the dragnet. He claimed he could kill a dozen children on a school bus just by shooting out the front tire and picking them off as they bounce out. Parents panicked. Police lost sleep. Bus drivers became armed escorts. This was no longer just a string of murders. This was a breakdown in the social contract. People realized the police couldn't protect them, not from a man who controlled the narrative from the shadows. Every rule book was failing. Theories were fracturing. Confidence was crumbling. And in that vacuum of fear, the Zodiac thrived. The turning point wasn't only the Stein murder. It was a realization that law enforcement wasn't chasing him. He was leading them. He dictated the tempo, picked the battlegrounds, and still had time to write letters about how much fun he was having. The world didn't just fear the Zodiac now. It doubted itself. And that is far more dangerous than bullets. Resolution? Don't make me laugh. The Zodiac case is a textbook definition of dangling threads, half-knots tied in shadows, fraying until they're indistinguishable from urban legend. No arrest, no trial, just a ghost who stopped writing one day, as if boredom had claimed him more thoroughly than any police dragnet ever could. Some insist the killings went on under different names, hidden in other unsolved cases scattered across California. Others argue he simply quit, like a kid tossing aside a broken toy, his appetite sated. But what kind of man kills at random, writes with the arrogance of a dictator, and then vanishes? People don't just stop being the Zodiac. The letters themselves deepen the riddle. Some are widely accepted as authentic. Others dismiss as hoaxes. Yet even the fakes feel corrosive, feeding the same terror. Because once the name Zodiac existed, anybody with a typewriter could weaponize it. Think about that. His shadow was so large it spawned imitators. Ghost of the ghost. And the ciphers, God, the ciphers. The first one cracked open like a rotten egg, dripping out his deranged philosophy. But the later ones, especially the infamous 340-character cipher, sent after Stein's murder, that one resisted all comers for decades. Linguists, cryptographers, FBI experts, all baffled, until 2020, when a team of civilian codebreakers finally cracked it. The message? Not a confession, not an identity, but another grotesque manifesto about enjoying the afterlife. A 40-year taunt, ending in more emptiness. That's the Zodiac's cruelest trick. Every answer breeds a deeper question. Why did he stop? Was he ever even just one man? Did police brush shoulders with him in Presidio Heights, unknowingly waving goodbye to history's most infamous serial killer? And then there's the DNA question. Modern testing has teased hope. Swabs from envelopes, stamps, letters, some partial, some degraded, inconclusive, a few tantalizing leads, none definitive. We live in a world where genealogical databases have toppled killers like the Golden State Murderer. And yet the Zodiac still lurks in limbo, untouchable, as if laughing from a grave. Officially, the case is still open, but unofficially, it's become folklore. Half crime scene, half ghost story. A riddle people dedicate their lives to, chasing meaning in symbols left by someone who may have meant nothing at all. The lingering question is not just who is a Zodiac, it's why are we still listening to him? Why does his voice echo louder than the voices of those he silenced? Why, 50 years on, do we still lean closer when someone whispers, "This is a Zodiac speaking"? The Zodiac didn't just haunt California. He rewired the way America thinks about fear. After his letters, after his ciphers, after his smug little symbol carved itself into every newspaper headline, the idea of the serial killer became a cultural archetype. Before Zodiac, murder was something you read about in the crime blotter, a single page tucked behind the classifieds. After Zodiac, murder became myth. Think of the ripple effects. Police departments across the country rethought communication strategies, desperate not to get played like San Francisco had been. Criminal profiling began sharpening into a tool, not just an academic exercise. Entire task forces sprang up for killers who previously would have been dismissed as one-off maniacs. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the very foundation of modern criminal psychology, was shaped in part by trying to understand monsters like Zodiac. And then there's the media. Zodiac proved the killer could become a brand. He wasn't just writing letters. He was running a marketing campaign of terror. Every time his symbol hit the front page, circulation spiked. People clipped out his ciphers like coupons, arguing over them in kitchens, classrooms, bars. Crime wasn't tucked away anymore. It was public theater, and everyone had front row seats. That legacy stains pop culture too. Movies, books, comics. Zodiac's shadow stretches over all of them. From Dirty Harry's Scorpio Killer to David Fincher's Zodiac film. His image became shorthand for the unknowable predator, the faceless threat just beyond the glow of your porch light. Even the cliche of the cryptic, taunting killer, that is Zodiac's fingerprint. But legacies aren't just ink and celluloid. They're scars. Ask the families of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Paul Stein. Ask Michael Mageau, who lived but carried bullet wounds and trauma through the rest of his life. Their names are footnotes in a story where the villain stole the spotlight. That's the cruelest inheritance Zodiac left us. The imbalance between the notoriety of the killer and the silence of the victims. And yet, his shadow still bends around us. Every new unsolved cipher, every internet forum buzzing with theories, every grainy photograph of suspects pinned to digital corkboards. Zodiac is alive in them. He turned his crimes into an open loop, a puzzle that refuses to close. And in doing so, he carved himself into the American psyche. The legacy isn't just unsolved murders. It's a society trained to expect letters from the dark. Picture it. A killer who may be dead, dust in some forgotten grave, still whispering across decades because of a handful of letters and a circle with a cross through it. That's the Zodiac's ultimate punchline. He doesn't even need to exist anymore. His words have metastasized into folklore, into internet rabbit holes, into the half-lit corners of our imagination where we still expect him to step out chuckling. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We gave him that power. Every headline, every theory, every documentary dissecting his ciphers, each one is a brick in the monument he built to himself. He knew that violence shocks, but mystery endures. He didn't just write about slaves for the afterlife. He created slaves for his myth. Us, you, me, everyone's still talking about him in 2025 like he's sitting over our shoulder, smudging ink onto fresh paper. Maybe that's why his case stings deeper than solved monsters like Bundy or Gacy. Those men ended in mugshots, trials, executions, closed files. But Zodiac? He's still out there, not in body, maybe, but in narrative. He proved that sometimes the scariest killer isn't the one you catch. It's the one you never stop chasing. I can't shake one thought. In one of his letters, he wrote, "I am waiting for a good movie about me. It wasn't enough to kill. It wasn't enough to terrify." He wanted immortality through story. And in a twisted way, we've given it to him. The films, the books, the endless decoding. This is the movie he asked for. We're living inside it. So what's left? A symbol that meant nothing and everything. Victims whose names deserve louder echoes than a ciphered bragging. And a society that keeps glancing over its shoulder, not because we think he's still hunting, but because we know someone else might be. Someone who's learned from the Zodiac that terror doesn't end with blood. It ends when the story runs dry. And this story, it still hasn't. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.